ketchup and mayo, a match made in heaven. Condiments heaven, that is. But you didn't click on this video to hear about me talk about ketchup, mayo, or mustard. Mustard's not here. She's back home. We're here to talk about PCV system. PCVs, Positive Crankcase Ventilation. I get a lot of messages, a lot of DMs about PCV routing, problems with PCV systems. With these cars, they have the dual intake system. So that kind of adds a little more complexity to it. As you know, on any car, there's the triangle of combustion, I guess you would say. But that triangle consists of spark, air, and fuel. Spark, air, and fuel is the basics to any compression, any four-stroke cylinder, to any four-stroke motor. And sometimes one of those things may overpower the other. Whereas we have too much air, not enough spark. And in those cases, when there's too much air, not enough spark, we have unspent air-gas mixture that sometimes in the compression stroke bypasses the rings, or sometimes in an overboosted car bypasses the rings again. Too much boost sneaks past those rings. And what happens when that mixture squeezes through those tiny little gaps, it gets into the engine system and outside of the combustion chamber. Outside of the combustion chamber is the bottom end, the head, everything like that in these cars, or in a motor in general. And when that mixture gets in there, it creates, in some vehicles like with the ethanol, it creates sludge. If it's too much fuel in the triangle, it could break down your oil, creating some thinning of the oil problems. When that pressure builds, as it keeps going through and it keeps building over time, and you're not expelling that pressurized gas, you actually overpressurize the bottom end, top end, and you could blow out seals. You could push out the rear seal, you could damage some valve cover seals and stuff. So pressurizing the engine outside of combustion chamber is something that's not really, I guess, beneficial to an engine. Around the 1960s is when a PCV system came about and when they started designing PCVs for cars. And like I said, these cars kind of make it a little more complicated. I go to raise this and then I realized that, hey, yeah, this don't have no springs. Can you help me out, Wes, please? Okay, let me go. Yeah, thanks, Wes. So like this one, all shiny and clean. I haven't cleaned my car since the Deer episode. The reason I wanted to come here and discuss with these two cars are very good examples of a VHR PCV system. One is recirculated and one is atmospheric. They both utilize catch cans and they both are used to release positive crankcase pressure. In my case, we all know I have the Switchback Racing atmospheric catch can. On Wes's, you've seen his car before, he has the Z1 recirculated catch cans. So once again, there's two very big important distinctions. Regardless of recirculation or atmospheric, we still have to follow some basic principles when dealing with a PCV system. Okay, so we'll start with Wes's car. Wes's has a recirculated catch can system. Because it's recirculated, it's a lot more closer to factory. But the first thing we need to do is remove this half of the cover so we could see the rest of the PCV routing. And with YouTube magic, just like that, we have the cover off. Now you can see the full routing, everything like that. And as I was mentioned before, with normal V6 engines with a single intake, there is a fresh air inlet. It goes through half the V and it mixes with the crankcase gas and mixture and all that funk, and it pulls out through the other side. Comes out the other side and goes into the intake manifold, where the intake manifold burns up all that extra unspent fuel vapor and stuff like that. That's in a typical single intake motor. It's get rid of the gas vapor, the oil vapor, get some of that ethanol out. As we see here, once again with a VHR, the engine split in half. Because the engine split in half, we are looking at 2 separate intakes and actually 2 separate PCVs. That's a big distinction, 2 separate PCVs. Whereas a traditional engine, like I said, has one side in, one side out. So because it's 2 separate PCVs, we have 2 separate inlets for fresh air and 2 separate outlets for that oil vapor and gas vapor to be spent. In a MAF car, which this is a MAF car, air is pulled in, it's metered by the MAF. Metered, that's important. As air comes in, it's metered, it goes in through the throttle body. So here is where the MAF is. Everything after the MAF, it's metered air. It's registered by the computer, it's checked, it knows how much fuel it has to burn. When it gets to this portion here, we know normal intakes, even the factory system, has an inlet into the back of the valve cover. Also has the rest goes to the throttle body to intake the intake manifold. A certain amount of air gets pulled in from the downstrokes in the combustion chamber, the 4-cylinder cycle and stuff like that, and that air gets pulled into the manifold. Percentage of that is metered through the computer, goes through this valve that enters, this is a fresh air inlet, enters the back of the valve cover and gets into the crankcase. That air gets in the crankcase, mixes with everything, and in front, over here, right here, in the front right here, this bottom hose, this is the outlet. This is the outlet of the crankcase. So the PCV valve is a check valve. It's a one-way check valve, and it lets the air comes out. And in a factory system, it will just come out and go directly into the manifold. So the manifold inlet here, forget about this catch can. Air goes into the back of the valve cover, mixes, pulls air out through the PCV, and this hose normally comes directly into the front. And like I say, this car is split in 2, so this is happening on both sides. The back is the inlet. Remember, this is important because with all these modifications that you guys are doing, we have to keep the routing correct. Air comes in, passes the maps, it's metered, goes into the intake through the downstroke of the pistons. Some of that is bypassed through here because all this flow is all calculated by the manufacturer, and all that amount of air that goes in through a throttle body or gets diverted into the back of the valve cover, it's all calculated by Nissan or whoever does that. Now, in this case, catch can is intercepting the gases coming out of the crankcase. So before the gas goes back into the manifold, these Z1 catch cans have, some have like a Brillo pad or some screens and stuff. So the vapor that comes out passes through this media, and this media is a lot cooler than the gas. So you get condensation. It condenses on the media, it drips and collects. Then you have gas only or air only getting sucked back into the engine. Now we come to our not so clean engine bay. You know Wes right now, very OCD in his cleaning. When I get the car back together, hold me to it. Right now I'm kind of in a bad mood. The car's not fixed, it's all ugly. Let's go ahead. I'm trying to get the 510 done. I digress. We come to same VHR engine that we all do love, but an atmospheric catch can system. With this atmospheric catch can system, I think it's truly started to get popular with these admin intakes. These admin intakes were the first set of intakes that stopped coming with the intake tube here. Every other, well, prior to that, every other intake manufacturer had this outlet. So because admin took this out, it created a lot of issues. I would say they really did not support this change properly. A lot of people were scratching heads, had a lot of issues with their cars and fixing their PCV system, because by deleting these tubes, they interfered with the routing of the PCV. They interfered with how the engines are supposed to breathe. So let's discuss how to properly vent your PCV. You still have the same inlet. You have the same inlet right here and the outlet in the back. Let me interject with the phone because I want to have a stationary camera there, but I'll do a quick record here. You will see we have our inlet port here, we have our outlet port here. That's the same thing that's on Wes's car. Wes's car, we have the output coming out there, we have the inlet in the back of the valve cover, and then we have the outlet right here. Same exact setup. The only difference is we're not going back to the manifold. We are totally venting. We're not going back to the manifold. We're not using the manifold inlets. These front nipples, these are one of the biggest things that trips everyone up. These nipples and these rear ports. That's the two biggest problems with modifying the PCV system. Let's discuss how a car with a deleted PCV system flows. We have our intake manifold pulling air through our intakes. It's get metered by the MAF, metered once again by the MAF, and it goes into the engine. This is where it gets tricky and a lot of people battle back and forth. Which system is better? In the recirculated system, you have that draw, you have that pull to get that excess blow-by out of the system. With a atmospheric catch can like this, you're self-extracting. You're technically not venting as you do. You're just venting as the pressure builds, it atmospherically pulls out. So in one of these systems, you would not see the amount of condensed oil and water and stuff in there like you would see in a catch can, because that is more actively flowing throughout the engine, pulling the ring seats down and clearing the crankcase a lot better. This is self-ventilating. This system depends on the pistons and the compression stroke. All that extra pressure that goes down, or in a high boost car, all that pressure that bypasses the rings, it has no resistance. So that just freely exits on an open air catch can system. So everybody's right now in the comments scratching their heads, which system's best? Atmospheric? Recirculated? Let me challenge you with this. On an atmospheric setup, well, let's start with recirculated setup. Let me challenge you with this. On a recirculated setup, remember we discussed the check valve? What the check valve does is only allow air to come out, not go in. On an NA car, the compression strokes create a draw on the intake manifold, and it draws air and it pushes it, well, it sucks it into the combustion chamber. On a boosted car, this is not a boosted car, on a boosted car, we have boost pressure that builds up and enters up the tube and into the intake manifold, and we have a pressurized intake manifold. In a car, we have a suction system sucking it in. On a boosted car, not mine, on just in general, you have a pressure. Sometimes the thing to worry about is if you don't have these locks or these intake nipples for the PCV system closed, or if they're connected, under high boost with the pressure in the upper manifold, you could actually send boost through. If you have a second check valve, that might fail. If you have the factory check valve, that might fail. And you would essentially be pressurizing your crankcase. So you're pressurizing your intake, your combustion chamber, and then you're also pressurizing your bottom end. Where's that pressure to go? Rear main seal, front seal, valve cover gaskets. It's just going to, the engines are going to go, right? On a boosted car, a vented system would be beneficial. all the boost that goes past the rings, all the boost that gets into the bottom end would push itself out of the way through a vented catch can. NA systems, a recirculated catch can is best. Like I said earlier, another benefit with that pull and that suck, it's pulling and sucking through the valve and sucking back into the manifold. That suck is actually also seating rings better. In a forced induction system, it will kind of push it down, but here it seats the rings. It should also help in not letting as much blow by go by. So it's tit for tat is what you want to do, but let's discuss some mistakes. There is a lot of mistakes. Metered air. I said metered air a lot of times in this video. A lot of people, they would just leave this PCV side connected and plug up the inlet because their intakes don't have ports. So what are you doing by doing that? Like as you see, the intake is running in, but then they plug up and they delete the inlet in the back of the valve cover because they don't have this port. What you are doing, you are still creating a draw. You are still creating a suction off the crankcase with no inlet. So you're creating a huge vacuum in your car, and yes, it's going to suck some of that gas and stuff out, but if you run your car and you switch off your car, you would literally hear the air rushing back into the crankcase when you turn off the car because there's no more suction, there's no more vacuum. Somewhere, somehow, when you do that, air's got to go in somehow. It's either your engine's going to be very strong or some seal somewhere is going to pop for that excess air to go in. And that brings to another point. Whenever there's excess air, unmetered air, there's going to be bad idle. Some people, what they also do, they also get that EPS PCV kit. And with that EPS PCV kit, they would have this connector still connected. So they have the inlet, and then they would have the PCV kit connected to the PCV valve sitting out here with this open. And what you're doing, you're sending metered air into the crankcase and then vented it. So you're running rich because you're losing air. The MAF system is reading all the air coming in, right? The MAF is reading the air coming in. It's going into the back of the valve cover, and then it's just getting atmosphered out to the EPS kit. To run an EPS kit properly, you need to cap the intake, cap the back PCV inlet, cap the inlet on the manifolds, and then vent the PCV valve. One negative thing about that is those hot gases are going to come out those filters and it's going to condense on anything cold around it. So you would find a lot of oil and a lot of blow by condensating right where those filters are, and you get a nice messy area right here. Remember, however you're routing, if your intakes have an output like this or no output like that, depicts of what you're going to do for your PCV routing. The PCV system is a flow. Always remember the flow. You have to let it breathe and let it flow properly. If you either go in atmospheric, just let everything breathe, block off the intake, block off the manifold. If you want to recirculate and run catch cans, you just got to make sure you flow them properly. From the intake, flows to the back of the valve cover, and that's fresh air entering the crankcase. Then the mucky blow-by is coming out through the PCV check valve, through a separator, which is a catch can, and then clean, nice air is going into the engine to get yummied up for some horsepowers. So that breaks down to the fundamental question of why. Why go through all this trouble of mucking with your PCV system? Why do tit or why do tat? The whole purpose is to not let that blow-by gas go back into the intake manifold, get into your throttle bodies. It's to stop all that stuff, all that yucky stuff coming up from the crankcase to go back in there to be burnt. Because that's its original purpose. It's not only to vent an engine, but to reburn all that stuff, to reburn all that spent gas, to reburn all that blow-by oil and vapors. But to us tuners that want every last bit of horsepower out of our cars, that blow-by is detrimental for power. It gums up the intake passages. It robs, yeah, I was not about to say that. It robs horsepower because the carbon and the oil and everything lowers the octane, lowers the air molecules. There's less air. Back to the triangle. Fuel, spark. Sorry. Yes, fuel, spark, air. It lowers the air quality. It lowers the air amount. We lose horsepower. That's the fundamental reason for doing a catch can, is to remove that blow-by gas. But because of our engines are so complicated, and that relationship with the triangle, that lower octane changes the timing and everything. The tuner may not like that. He may want to time on the edge, on the fringe. He may want to do a conservative time. But anything that creates knock, any imbalance of the horsepower trio, fuel, spark, air, any imbalance affects timing, affects power. And that's why we go through the trouble of doing a modification like this. As long as you guys take the time to learn how to do it properly and not actually create harm or actually create a detriment of horsepower, but we actually gain numbers. And on that note, guys, thank you very much for joining me on this in-depth discussion of our PCV system. If you do think it was informative, and if you do think that you learned something today, please hit that like, please hit that sub. Share it with a friend that is having issues, or a friend that is contemplating a 3-inch intake. These are the Z1 3-inch carbon fiber intakes, 3-inch aluminum intakes. Both do require tuning. Once again, I have another video, things to know about 3-inch intakes. Please take your time to look at that video. But if you're considering getting one of these intakes over the stock 2.5, take a look at those. And once again, guys, put in the comments, thank Wes for his time and using his car once again for a technical discussion. And until the next time, y'all, take it easy.